All right, Skinny, let's get into actually talking about this Bengals team and this upcoming season. I'm going to start with a category that, for me, I think is a tough one because we know so much about the guys that are coming back, what they're capable of, what they've already done in their careers. Do you have any potential breakout names for us heading into the season for the Bengals? Who is a guy that may surprise or maybe we haven't seen much of yet that is going to play a big role?
So, yeah, I did a column on local12.com on Tuesday. It's my annual predictions column where I pick an offensive breakout player and a defensive breakout player. And are you ready for the sexy name that's the offensive breakout player?
Please give it to us.
Alex Kappa.
I mean, oh, man.
That's where I'm at in the program.
How many pancakes is he going to have?
He's coming off a really good year last year. PFF has him, I think, ranked as the 18th best guard in the NFL, which is a nice place to start. And I think if he plays the way he played last season and another year in this offense, I don't think he'll be in Pro Bowl consideration because usually that's a multi-step process to get to that point. But I do think he's going to have a great season. And I thought he had a really good year last year, second year in the offense. It's Joe Burrow's not breaking out. T. Higgins is not breaking out. Joe Mixon I don't think is going to break out. He was my breakout guy last year, and he didn't, have a great season. I don't expect him to have a great season this season. And T. Higgins isn't breaking out. I think T has another 1,000-yard season and puts up normal T. Higgins numbers. I can't pick Irv Smith. So where am I picking on offense? I'm going with Alex Kappa of all people.
Yeah. So is that just for offense, or is that for the team?
Just for offense.
Okay. All right. What do you have for defense?
Defense, I went with Cam Taylor-Britt. I thought he really got better as last season went along. I think he's had a really nice camp. I know he got beat a couple of times by Jamar on some go routes and a couple double moves, and some of that came when they weren't allowed to put hands on receivers, so he got kind of a free release. And anytime Jamar Chase is going to get a free release, you're probably dead as a cornerback. So I took that with a little grain of salt. I mean, I love his physicality in the run game. Watching that replay of the Buffalo playoff game that we had on Star 64, which is our sister station to Local 12. I didn't watch the whole thing, start to finish, but tuning in and out. The physicality of Cam Taylor-Britt just shows up constantly. And I just think he's poised for in year two to make a big jump forward at that cornerback spot.
I like that name a lot. Yeah, he's one that I'm excited to watch this year. And part of the reason why I'm not as worried about the secondary, even though there's been some turnover back there. Everyone's talked about the safeties a lot and stuff, but I think they've got a lot of talent coming up in the secondary that are kind of ready to make their mark. And he's part of that. For me, I think I've mentioned this name every year for the last 2 years when we've done something of this nature. I think the first year it was like the rookie I'm most excited to see. Last year, he was my breakout guy. This year, by God, he's my breakout guy again. I'm going with Joseph Ossai. I love the guy. I just think at some point he is going to become an impact player in the NFL, and we're in year 3. He seems to be healthy. I think it might be this year finally.
He made some big plays last year. Of course, he's most noted for the negative play on the unnecessary reverse on Patrick Mahomes, but he made some really big plays last season and thought he had a great camp, and then unfortunately got hurt in that preseason finale. He's probably going to miss at least this week and maybe next week, but I don't mind that pick. My only problem for him is how healthy can he stay, right? Because that's been kind of the big part for him.
Yeah, I guess the ankle thing, though, it's not. I mean, he's going to miss probably a game or two. You think?
Right.
But aside from that, like all the other stuff is healed up, right? I mean, there's no lingering issues from anything else. So
no, he was great. He was great in camp.
Yeah, I would hope a turned ankle is something or a sprained ankle is something that gets better with 4 to 6 weeks, and then you're kind of back to full strength, hopefully. And the thing is, they don't need him right away. Like he can take his time to work his way back into the mix.
Yeah, you're not going to force it, but I don't know if it's the don't need him. I mean, now back up in the rotation, I like Cam Sample. In fact, talking to Lou Anarumo yesterday, he really praised, because we kind of asked, with Joseph likely out, who kind of becomes that third rotational end? Is it Miles Murphy, the rookie, or is it? I think that's the only name somebody threw out who asked the question. And he said, don't forget about Cam Sample. He does a lot of things for us that maybe people don't see, and he's just a good, solid rotational piece. And so I'm kind of with you, but Joseph, for me, is that maybe key missing component in the pass rush that it really, if he takes a step forward, really is going to make that pass rush click.
Well, but they're probably facing two teams that are probably more run oriented.
No, that's a late
right. So that helps a little bit with
great
that
point.
Too.
Yeah.
Biggest concern for this team. What is it? We'll just leave it there. What is your biggest concern going in?
Yeah, the biggest concern is always injuries to key guys. So we're going to throw that to the side. You can say that about literally every team in the league that has playoff and Super Bowl aspirations. I think it would be that somehow, some way, Orlando Brown takes a step backwards, because that you're kind of basing the improvement of this offensive line on Orlando Brown handling his business at left tackle. There's nothing to suggest that's going to happen. Um, I just that would be my one fear is, Kansas City wasn't going to pay what it was going to pay, and it said, we're okay without him. The track record is what it is. You got 4 straight Pro Bowl nods. Everybody thinks highly of him. It was a great signing. He looked good in camp. There were times that Trey Hendrickson owned him, and so did Sam Hubbard a couple times. But some of that's camp stuff. All the players, when you talk to them about him, are really praiseful of what he can do and does. I guess that would be my only real fear is, I guess you could argue, do the 2 safeties fall flat on their face and can't replace Bell and Bates? I don't think that's going to be the case. Are they going to be Bell and Bates? Not in week 1, maybe not in week 2, but I think as they evolve together, you're going to see them get better as the season goes on. So, yeah, I guess that's my lone fear. I don't have many fears. It's a really good roster.
Yeah, I think with the Orlando Brown thing, if you look back to last year, everyone was like, La'el Collins is such a huge, massive get. He instantly upgrades the offensive line. He makes them so much better. And then you get to the season, it's like, well, yeah, no, he's better, but he's not really what we thought. So I think that concern with Orlando Brown is legitimate, even though everyone's saying, oh, he's such an upgrade. He makes the line so much better. And in theory, yes, he is better than any player they had last year, but it doesn't always quite work out the way you think when you get him into the mix or whatever. And we saw that last year. So I think that's a legitimate concern. On the defensive side, for me, it's not like, I don't think these guys are going to be bad in the secondary, or there's going to be a ton of miscues. I guess the bigger concern there is, I think the strength of the defense the last few years has been the continuity, and the fact that they had that kind of, people call it bend but don't break, but it's more, we're going to make you run a ton of plays to get into the end zone, and eventually you're going to screw up before we do. That's the concern, is do they have that same level of, that same threshold of, we're not going to screw up for 12, 14 plays on defense. You eventually are. Well, now do they screw up, sooner before the offense does, and they don't get that big turnover in the red zone, or they aren't able to force the field goal in the red zone like they have so many times over the last few years? Do they just lose that little bit of an edge because they don't have as much continuity and the same guys that have been together back there so long?
Yeah, I think having 9 starters back helps, but that's a good point. I remember a piece I wrote, I think before the Kansas City game, about the fact of how these guys had all been in the system together, and especially Bates and Bell, how they're able to disguise so many things. And because, everybody trusts everybody else, Lou was talking about this yesterday of, he feels good about Nick and Dax, but he said, Jesse and Vaughn had unspoken chemistry where Vaughn would know if a guy's coming across that he doesn't have to say anything to pass the guy off, knowing Jesse's going to be where he's supposed to be, and Vaughn can take another responsibility. And so that trust factor that comes into play. But I do think having 9 guys with that continuity helps. If it was 3 guys or 4 guys and you're mixing in a bunch of new dudes, then I think I'd be worried. But I think the fact you got 9 guys that have been through this system a bunch together is going to be a big help.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm like super confident about the defense. That's not really a big concern for me, but if I'm looking for something I'm trying to find, it's like, maybe because they did seem to force a lot of timely turnovers the last 2 seasons. I think Bell and Bates were a big part of that. Maybe they'll lose some of that. But again, that's me really grasping for straws in terms of trying to find a hole in this team.
No, that's a fair point.
I don't think there are one.
I think it's a fair point. Yeah, like I said, the guys I interviewed for that story last year were really good in talking about how the trust factor and they know each other, knows what each other's doing, the communication between them, and they were able to really disguise a lot of stuff. You'd see Bates walk into the box, and then all of a sudden it's Von Bell blitzing, and Bates is dropping back real quick. And it's not just doing that; it's the timing of doing that and knowing when you're supposed to drop and when you're supposed to come and not show the quarterback too early. Just little nuanced stuff. And they were so good at doing that.
And the trust that Lou has in those guys, knowing they know how to do that. It's like, well, do you get a little less risky or a little more conservative with these guys because they don't know each other as well? That's the small stuff that is like, we won't find that out until we're playing the Chiefs and whatever that is, week 17. Yeah. So, but we'll see how it all plays out. But Skinny, last season, the Bengals defied the odds really when they made the playoffs despite starting 0-2. I think they then went to 2-3. Is there reason to be concerned about another slow start? Burrow did miss all of training camp basically again, all the preseason games. The starters didn't play in preseason. I know fans have been worked up about that. I don't think that matters. I'm curious to get your opinion, but is there a reason to be concerned about this team starting slow again?
I don't think so. I understand it because of what happened last year, but to the point of that opening game, right? I don't think it was. I do think the fact of Burrow trying to come back from the appendectomy was a bigger factor than what we all probably thought it was going to be. I think that was part of it. But you weren't going to be able to change that with more snaps for Joe Burrow. He just wasn't physically ready to play. And you still almost won it. If your long snapper doesn't get hurt, you do win it. I mean, It was a freaky way to lose. Then they go to Dallas, and they did not play well. There's no question about it. And that's about the point where they decided, time to rip up the run game and let's start from there. That's when they kind of went to the RPO, started to go to the RPO concept a little bit more. So I think some of that was a feeling out process. I don't think you're going to have quite that this year because remember last year you had so many new offensive linemen thrown into the mix. You thought they were going to be a wide zone running team, and they thought they had the parts for that. And they quickly found out, no, that's not this group's strengths. Then they figured out what their strengths were, and the running game started to click and the offense started to click. So I don't have that fear because they didn't have reps in preseason games. I don't.
Yeah, fans keep bringing that up, but my question is, if you were going to play those guys together, meaning the starters, and let's say Joe Burrow was healthy, what's the most you're going to play them for? A series?
A series.
Maybe one series, all 3 games. What does that actually do? Nothing.
Right.
I mean, they don't get on, their chemistry doesn't improve. They don't get on the same page. They don't get ready for the next opponent. None of that. I mean, and you're probably doing it in the second preseason games, meaning there's 3 weeks between then and the actual first. They would have literally zero impact on how they play against the Cleveland Browns in week 1. So I'm willing to listen to potential concerns about, Joe Burrow has been out and hasn't been practicing. Maybe he's got the calf thing is lingering a little bit. I'm willing to listen to those as concerns for a slow start. But the whole, the starters didn't get preseason snaps thing, quit telling me about that. They weren't the most they would have played is 1 series. It literally means less than nothing to me.
I agree with you. Now I know you can point to teams around the league. The Chiefs played their starters, I think, in 2 different preseason games. Different coaches have different philosophies. I mean, Andy Reid's an old school guy with some new school concepts, certainly, especially with how creative he is. But that's the way he does things. If you look at what, to Zach Taylor's credit, he's kind of held firm in the way he wants to do this. He believes fresher is better, and there's probably some truth to that. Again, I know they were 0-2 out of the gate. If Clark Harris does not get hurt in the opener, they still win that game. Period. End of story.
Right. I mean, it's really as simple as that. And by the way, the appendectomy thing is completely different from what he's dealing with this year. This year, he's been working out like a maniac, more so than usual, because he hasn't been on the field practicing. So he took a little longer before he kind of ramped that workout, the offseason workout routine down to get into game shape. I think he's going to be in the best spot he's been in yet since he's been in the league.
Yeah, he said he feels the best he's ever felt going into a season physically. Says he's spinning the ball better than he's ever spun it before, and I'll take him at his word for that.
Which by the way, is the situation. I hate press conferences. I hate them doing it with college basketball. I think they're completely worthless.
I'm not a big fan.
Is the thing at Bengals press conference that you're all there and it's part of your job, so you all feel like you have to ask your question about the thing?
I believe that's correct. I think that's probably right.
Because I sat there and I listened to the whole interview with Joe Burrow just in case there was something interesting for this podcast. And there were 17 different questions asked about a calf injury that isn't really an injury anymore, and that we all know he's going to start and play the entire game and everything's fine. And yet there were 17 different ways to ask about that injury, and he just kept answering them with non-answers, which he should do. Joe Burrow is exactly what you want in your franchise quarterback. He's boring. He says the right things, but doesn't say anything really interesting during his press conferences. He's the perfect quarterback in terms of answering those things. But it is absolutely brutal to sit through and listen to. I don't know how you guys do it. I would be ready to play in traffic on 471 after I get done with those.
It's part of the job.
It really is, because that was horrible. And then you guys get done with the injury thing, and it's like, all right, let's do 17 questions about the contract now that we all know the answer to already.
Yeah, we talked afterwards as a group, and we were a little surprised that none of us brought the contract question up any sooner than when it was brought up.
Well, I agree with that. I was waiting for it, and then I was like, well, there's 17 questions about the leg first. So
yes.
But then there were plenty of contracts.
Part of it is you try to soften guys up with just kind of the ones you're going to get the easy answers for, because you knew the contract answers were going to be non-answers or tough answers from him.
Don't get me wrong. I don't think there's really anything interesting to be said about a week 1 game, especially by your starting quarterback. But did you guys ever even get to asking him about the Browns or football? Yeah. I don't remember that. Okay.
Yeah, no. One of the questions, and I thought he answered it pretty good, was, the fact he's never won in Cleveland. I mean, now keep in mind he's only started 2 games there, but he's also 1-4 in his career against the Browns. And he did say, I know that's a thing, but it's not in my mind. So it is in his mind if he knows it's a thing. So, I thought that was an interesting answer to it.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. Let's get into the win total for the Bengals. Vegas always sets a win total for the team. It's usually a half number. You bet over under is kind of the way this works. If you're not familiar with betting, which by the way, we'll talk a little bit more about that because we've got legalized sports betting in Kentucky starting today as we record this on Thursday. But the total for the Bengals this year, Skinny, 10.5. What do you think about 10.5 for the Bengals?
So it went down. I thought it was 11.5 at one point. It might have gone down. So
I think it was at 11.5 during the summer.
Okay. And maybe the Burrow thing is what led to a win less, perhaps. I would take the over then. I ended up picking 11-6 for my final record. And I even wrote it when I wrote the analysis to why I picked it the way I do. I picked it into 3 categories. I don't do game by game. I think that's hard to do because you just don't know. I get people doing it and why they do. We all do things differently. I don't mind it, but it's hard in my opinion to do game by game. So I do what I call likely wins, likely losses, and then what I call swing games.
Yeah, I think you always do. They'll win 2 games, they'll lose 2 games, and here's 15 swing games.
Yeah, correct. No, I went 7, 3, and 7 so I had 7 swing games. Okay. So the 7, and I even wrote, and it's funny because I look back I think almost every year I've done this. I know the last 3 or 4 years for sure. There's always been one likely win that turns into a loss. And for me last year, I had them beating Pittsburgh in the opener as a likely win. That turned into a loss. And then there's always one likely loss that becomes a win. Last year, I had them losing at Tampa Bay, and that turned into a win. Last year, they went in. I had 9 swing games last year. One of those was the Bills game that got canceled. So in the other 8, they ended up going 6-2 in swing games. I got them going 4-3, but I made a case for them going 5-2 because 3 of the swing games are at home. Another of the swing games is at Tennessee, where they've wanted, they've kind of owned Tennessee at Tennessee of late, and they've won 3 in a row in the series with them. So they kind of have their number a little bit. So I could be talked into 12 wins. I don't see anything less than 11 barring crazy injury stuff. So if it's 10.5, I have to go over.
I'm with you on the over number, and I actually have them at 12-5. So I'm pretty similar to you in terms of what I'm seeing. And I agree that it's hard for me to get under that 10.5 number, quite honestly, when I look at the way the schedule sets up. So you said, how many wins did you have automatic? 7?
I had 7 automatic.
Likely,
I'm trying to look it up right now.
Okay, so let me guess. Rams, Titans, Cardinals, Texans, and Colts are definites, right?
Hang on a second. I'm gonna find the story so I can do it for sure. I do this stuff and then I don't know off the top of my head how I do things. All right, here we go. Scroll to it. This is good podcast materials.
Yeah, has it been posted already at local12.com?
It has been. I got it right here. All right, so do the ones you said you thought were likely wins again that I picked.
All right, so I would say, looking at the schedule, Rams, Titans, Cardinals, Texans, and Colts are 5 of the 7. And then who did you throw in there? Seahawks at home?
No, I didn't. That's one of my swing games. So here's the ones. I got Rams at Arizona, Houston, Pittsburgh at home, Indy, Minnesota, and Cleveland at home were my 7. I did not have the Titans. The Titans are one of my swing games, but that's one of the ones where I have them going 4-3 in swing games, and that's when I could be talked into going, that's probably a 5th win out of the swing games for me. You want to guess the 3 likely losses?
The losses are at 49ers.
Yep.
At Chiefs.
Yep.
And one of the AFC North games, or
at Baltimore. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So then the swing games are this game in the opener, the Baltimore game at home. So right off the bat, in my category, you're playing 2 swing games right out of the gate.
Yeah,
that can change this a lot.
I agree with completely. I mean, those are 2 huge games to start the season.
The Tennessee game just because it's on the road and they're a decent enough team, but again, like I said, I could easily be talked into saying that's a win because they've won lately. Seattle at home, Buffalo at home, at Jacksonville, and at Pittsburgh are all my swing games.
Okay.
So
yeah, I mean, the at the Titans game is one I feel like they should win, but it is on the road, so I get where.
Yeah, that's probably the only reason I did it.
Yeah.
So I could easily be talked into 12 wins.
Yeah, I mean, look, this team won 12 games last year without getting to play the Buffalo game, and after the start that they had.
Yeah, right. No,
so
you're right.
I mean, I feel like they are a better team this year. I feel like the schedule actually in some ways sets up better for them and more even for them than it did last year. Of course, last year we were all worried about the end of the schedule and they ran right through it with no problem at all. So shows you what we know. But yeah, I mean, I 12-5 feels good to me. I definitely like the over 10.5. I mean, 11-12 feels pretty good. I think this is actually the first year in a long time that I'll play a Bengals total number.
So season. In your opinion, and it's hard to do this because you have to kind of you have to be looking at everybody's schedule, but just off the top of your head, is 12 wins enough to get the 1 seed in the conference?
I think it will be partly because I think this conference is going to beat up on each other. I don't think anyone's going 5-1.
Yeah, I mean, I think Denver's much improved, which makes the series with Kansas City tougher. I don't think Vegas is good, but still to play at Vegas is going to probably be tough for Kansas City. And then obviously the Chargers are a playoff caliber team. I mean, the only division in which you can literally say sucks other than a team and a half is the South, where Jacksonville's probably the favorite to win it. And Tennessee could certainly give them a battle, but the rest of that division's not just slop. It's an utter mess. But yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it. I think there's going to be some cannibalization. I mean, you could clearly see that game in Kansas City on New Year's Eve being for the 1 seed in this conference. It feels like that's exactly what this is setting up to do.
Yeah. No, I agree. What do you think about the AFC North? I'm sorry, I was talking about the AFC North there initially when I said the 5-1 thing. What do you think how the AFC North plays out? You see the Bengals winning for sure, and then
I do, and so I also in the prediction column I picked the North and I picked my playoff team. So I had the Bengals going 11-6 because that's what I had them going with record wise. I got the Steelers going 10-7 and finishing second and being a playoff team. I got Baltimore 9-8 and the Browns at 8-9. And I know there's a lot of people bullish on Baltimore, and I understand why. I think it's a good roster. And I know they're trying to do things with Lamar to lighten the load in the running game. But he's also missed 5 games each of the last 2 seasons. That doesn't scream injury prone, but the trend is he's going to miss games. And in those 10 games he's missed over the last 2 years, they're 3-7. So if Lamar misses a chunk of season again, I'm just not bullish enough on them being able to overcome it. And history recently suggests he's going to miss a chunk of games again.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's completely fair. Okay, what about Super Bowl, Skinny? Do you have a Super Bowl pick?
I do. And I don't do this lightly. If anybody's ever heard me from my radio days through this, I am not a homer by any stretch of the imagination. I know we're talking very glowingly about the Bengals because they deserve to be talked glowingly about. It's a good football team. I have them beating the 49ers in the Super Bowl.
Wow. I mean, that's what everyone's been talking about ever since these two teams kind of came back to life over the last few years is what if they met up again and did the repeat, the whole Joe Montana game, reenact it. Hopefully the Bengals end up on top and Joe Burrow has his day in the sun this time. If you're a Cincinnati fan, that would be an incredible storyline.
It really would.
This city. I mean, that's as good as it gets, really.
You win your first Super Bowl by exercising the demons of 2 49ers losses, right?
Yeah. Oh, man, that would be incredible. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. The whole thing with a lot of people picking the Bengals this year, I've seen, Bengals over the Cowboys, I think was the AP's prediction.
I love the Cowboys.
And which I actually like that call too. I think that's a legitimate possibility this year. And I think in the NFC, it feels pretty wide open. The Eagles are clearly the best team. Them or the 49ers, I think, are clearly the best teams. But it kind of feels like this might be a year where a dark horse wins the NFC because it does feel a little weaker at the top. I'm going to say Bengals beat the Saints. I'm going to say Derek Carr makes the Saints the surprise team in the NFC, and they make a run to the Super Bowl with Derek Carr.
I would feel good for Derek Carr because I think he's a really good quarterback who was very maligned in Oakland/Las Vegas.
I do too. I think he's been in 2 kind of crappy situations. He's actually pretty darn good, especially if he's in the right situation. Like I think he's one of those quarterbacks he's definitely not an elite guy. He's not in the Burrow or Mahomes or any of those types of round, but he's probably somewhat, depending on how big you make that second or tier, he's in the second or third tier of guys, I think, talent wise. And if you put him around all the right pieces, which I don't know if the Saints have exactly that, but I do think they have a pretty damn good defense. And I think Chris Olave is really good. And if Mike Williams comes back to life here,
Mike Thomas
comes back to life here. I'll say I've read something about Mike Williams earlier who died. The receiver, just the former Bills receiver, I think.
Bills in Tampa. Yeah, Bills in Tampa.
Yeah. Anyway, if Mike Thomas comes back to life and can be maybe not his old form, but something close to, I think the Saints have a chance to surprise people. And again, I'm kind of picking a dark horse name here because I think the NFC is weak at the top.
So it's funny. So I also picked all the playoff teams. I'm not going to go through the whole process. You can go to local12.com, read it for yourself if you care. But I literally flipped a coin between the Saints and Falcons, who I picked to win that division, and it came up Falcons. So I don't even have the Saints making the playoffs.
Desmond Ritter homer. That's all that is. That's Cincinnati homerism.
I love their run game, and I love what the possibilities they can do to make him play to his strengths.
Fair enough. But by the way, if I was really making my pick, I probably would have gone Bengals Cowboys. But after like the AP released that yesterday, it's like I can't say that. That's embarrassing. So